Hall Brown Stadium didn't feel like just another Week 1 battleground. It felt like the epicenter of a full-scale mutiny. For months, Cleveland fans had been told the same story. Shedeur Sanders was the future. Ownership pushed him as the centerpiece. His jersey sales spiked before he ever took a snap. Training camp clips went viral. Teammates whispered he was ready. The energy around him felt different. Like maybe, just maybe, the Browns had finally landed their quarterback of tomorrow. And then came Sunday. In a showdown with divisional rival Cincinnati, Sanders never touched the field. Not the first quarter, not the second, not even as the offense sputtered, stalled, and groaned through an ugly one-point loss. Cleveland fans who filled the visiting stands weren't just disappointed, they were furious. Chants of "We want Sanders" echoed louder each quarter, until they drowned out the Bengals' own home crowd. By the final whistle, the atmosphere wasn't bitterness, it was open revolt. So what exactly happened? According to insiders, this wasn't just a coaching choice, it was a power play. Head coach Kevin Stefanski reportedly refused to play Sanders, not because of performance, but to reassert his authority. Ownership wanted Shedeur on the field. The locker room wanted his spark. Even the offensive coordinator pushed for a change. But Stefanski stood firm. Against the fans, against his bosses, against his own players. The fallout was immediate. Players muttering post-game, fans chanting long after the loss, national analysts torching the decision, hashtags demanding change trending before the buses even left the stadium. This wasn't just a game management mistake. It was a crack in the very foundation of the Browns organization. And in Cleveland, cracks have a way of collapsing into full disasters. So here's the real story. How one Sunday in Cincinnati spiraled into a quarterback controversy, a coaching crisis, and maybe even the end of Kevin Stefanski's era. The box score won't tell the story. It'll just show a one-point loss to Cincinnati. But for anyone who watched, it wasn't the final score that mattered. It was the sight of Shedeur Sanders standing on the sideline, helmet on, waiting for a call that never came. From kickoff, the tension was obvious. Cleveland's offense looked flat. Drives ended in punts, red zone trips fizzled into field goals, and every possession felt predictable. Cameras kept cutting to Sanders warming up, throwing crisp passes, looking ready. Fans in the stands noticed too. By the second quarter, chants of "We want Sanders" started bubbling. By the third, they were deafening. By the fourth, they felt revolutionary. What made this so explosive wasn't just that Sanders was benched, it was the timing. This wasn't preseason. This wasn't garbage time. This was Week 1, opening day, against a division rival, with the game on the line. If there was ever a safe, obvious moment to insert the rookie and spark momentum, it was here. Yet Stefanski never budged. Insiders later revealed it wasn't about Sanders' readiness at all. It was about control. Ownership reportedly encouraged giving Sanders a chance. Offensive staff pushed for it mid-game. Even veterans whispered in frustration. But Stefanski's message was clear. He makes the decisions, not anyone else. That decision turned a manageable loss into a full-blown controversy. Fans didn't leave the stadium quietly. Many stayed half an hour after the final whistle. Period. Still chanting for Sanders, venting their rage at a coach who ignored what felt obvious. Social media detonated instantly, with hashtags calling for Stefanski's firing before the team buses had even left the parking lot. The benching wasn't just seen as conservatism, it was painted as betrayal, a coach putting ego over the team, and in the process, throwing gas on what is now the NFL's hottest quarterback controversy. After the opening day meltdown, the debate shifted quickly from "why didn't Shedeur play" to a bigger, uglier discussion. Who's really in charge of the Cleveland Browns? Multiple insiders reported that Stefanski's decision to keep Sanders sidelined wasn't about reads, accuracy, or nerves. It was about power. Ownership, particularly Jimmy Haslam, had made it clear on draft night that Sanders was the franchise centerpiece. Not just a project, but a player expected to see meaningful snaps early. The front office wanted their investment on the field. The fans wanted their spark. Even offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt reportedly made several sideline pushes to put Sanders in. But Stefanski, he said no, over and over and over again. To some, it looked like a coach trying to preserve authority in a building where owners and executives constantly meddle. To others, it looked like plain stubbornness, digging in just to prove he wasn't going to be told how to run his offense. Either way, it exposed just how fractured Cleveland's structure really is. Veterans in the locker room were baffled. Some openly admitted after the game that Sanders gave them the best chance to win. Others questioned whether the coaching staff cared more about proving a point than actually putting points on the board. When players themselves are second-guessing the headset, you've officially crossed into dangerous territory. And remember, Cleveland's dysfunction isn't new. Decades of quarterback chaos have left the franchise scarred. Tim Couch, Johnny Manziel, Baker Mayfield, Deshaun Watson, the pattern is endless. Stefanski's refusal to play Sanders felt less like one isolated choice and more like a symbol of the Browns being the Browns. That's why this isn't just a football debate, it's a philosophical war. Ownership sees Sanders as the face of the future. Stefanski sees him as a pawn in a bigger battle for control. And caught in the middle are the players, the fans, and Sanders himself, each wondering how much longer this standoff can last before it tears the team apart. When the final whistle blew in Cincinnati, the Browns' one-point loss wasn't the story. The real headline was the quarterback who never got the chance. Inside the stadium, fans weren't just frustrated. They were furious. Many Cleveland supporters refused to leave. For nearly half an hour after the game, chants of "We want Sanders" echoed through Paul Brown Stadium. It was less about one game and more about betrayal. The franchise had sold Sanders as their future, then refused to use him when it mattered most. And that anger didn't stay in stands. It exploded online within minutes. Hashtags like #FireStefanski and #LetSandersPlay shot to the top of trending lists before the team buses even left the parking lot. Videos of Sanders warming up but never taking the field went viral on TikTok and Twitter, framed as proof that the Browns had sabotaged their own shot at a win. The media firestorm was just as relentless. Analysts like Mina Kimes and Shannon Sharp tore into the decision. Sharp flat out called it ego over football. Stephen A. Smith blasted it as coaching malpractice. Local reporters piled on, with one columnist writing, "You don't draft a spark plug to keep it in the glove compartment." And the criticism wasn't purely emotional, it was financial too. Fans began calling into local radio threatening to cancel season tickets. Team stores reported that Sanders jerseys were selling out, a direct message that supporters wanted him leading the franchise, not holding a clipboard. The gap between fan demand and coaching decisions had never looked wider. In the end, Week 1 wasn't merely a loss. It was a turning point, a collision between a loyal fan base that's had enough of the dysfunction and a head coach seemingly determined to prove a point. For Stefanski, it was the kind of night that doesn't just get debated. It lingers, smoldering, until somebody in the organization breaks. If Week 1 felt like dysfunction, Week 2 in Baltimore turned it into full-blown theater. The Ravens' defense has long been notorious for eating young quarterbacks alive. Complex blitz packages, disguised coverages, and a hostile crowd make M&T Bank Stadium one of the worst places to debut a rookie, which is why most people expected Shedeur Sanders to see even fewer snaps than he helmet-strapped, throwing passes clearly ready, but again ignored. By then, the chance had traveled. Browns fans who made the trip began calling his name just as loudly as they had the week before. Finally, with the game long out of reach and garbage time underway, Stefanski relented. Sanders jogged onto the field late in the fourth. At first, it seemed like a token gesture, the kind of low-stakes minutes meant to pacify the crowd without risk. But Sanders flipped the script instantly. On his very first possession, he led a rapid-fire drive with a precision 15-yard dart, a scramble for 20 more, and a perfect touchdown strike that silenced even Ravens fans. In just 8 minutes of action, he went 7 of 9 for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns. It didn't change the 35-17 final score, but it changed everything about the conversation. Cleveland's locker room buzzed. Teammates were openly saying what fans already knew. The kid belonged on the field. Stefanski's stubbornness now wasn't just questionable, it was indefensible. What should have been a meaningless fourth quarter turned into Shedeur Sanders' coming out party. And by Monday, the real question wasn't if he'd start again. It was why on earth he hadn't already. By the time the team plane touched down after the Baltimore loss, Stefanski's grip on the quarterback decision wasn't just being questioned, it was unraveling. Team insiders say calls to owner Jimmy Haslam began before the final whistle. Season ticket holders threatening refunds, corporate sponsors quietly expressing concern. Even national broadcasters were mocking Cleveland live on air, asking why their most talented rookie was frozen out until garbage time. For a franchise that's already synonymous with dysfunction, this was becoming public humiliation. Haslam, never one to sit back quietly, reportedly demanded an emergency series of meetings the very next day. The topic wasn't whether Shedeur Sanders was ready. It was whether Kevin Stefanski was sabotaging the franchise's investment simply to prove a point. The tension boiled over in film review sessions. Offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt, who'd been pushing for Sanders since camp, finally got the green light from upstairs. Sources suggested he was told to prepare game plans featuring Sanders immediately. Stefanski's resistance be damned. By Tuesday, the compromise became official. Stefanski was stripped of play-calling duties, a rare and humiliating move mid-season. Van Pelt would now be designing and calling the offense directly, with Sanders promoted to the starting role moving forward. The head coach still wore the title, but it was clear to everyone his power had evaporated. The announcement lit up Cleveland like wildfire. Fans who chanted for Sanders in 2 straight road losses finally got what they wanted. Jersey sales spiked again. Local sports radio flipped overnight from despair to cautious optimism. For a team built on decades of heartache, the move felt like more than a personnel shift. It felt like rebellion succeeding. But inside the walls of the facility, the move didn't heal wounds. Stefanski's authority was shattered. His assistants were split into factions. Dillon Gabriel's camp began eyeing the exit. And though Sanders was now the starter, he was stepping into a storm far bigger than football. This wasn't just a QB change. It was a declaration that ownership, not coaching, was running Cleveland. The buzz leading up to Shedeur Sanders' first official start was unlike anything Cleveland had seen in years. By midweek, the energy around the training facility felt transformed. Practices that once dragged now had urgency. Veterans who looked disengaged after the first 2 losses suddenly played with juice. And at the center of it all was a 23-year-old rookie who hadn't even thrown double-digit NFL passes yet. Players described Sanders' presence as magnetic. Teammates fed off his confidence, noticing how he commanded the huddle without hesitation. Wideouts praised his timing. Offensive linemen loved his composure. Even the defensive leaders admitted that just watching him organize the offense gave them a lift. Ownership noticed something else: money. Sanders' jerseys started outselling every other Browns player combined. Local bars and restaurants launched Sanders watch parties. Ticket brokers reported demand spiking. For a franchise long mocked as hopeless, Shedeur represented something priceless: belief. And then came his debut, Game 1 as the starter against Pittsburgh, a division powerhouse with a vicious defense and the hostile stadium. On the very first drive, Sanders looked anything but overwhelmed. A pinpoint 15-yard strike, a quick audible to beat the blitz, and then a deep ball for a touchdown that silenced the crowd and lit up every Browns fan watching. By halftime, Cleveland led 14-3. By the fourth quarter, Sanders had thrown 3 touchdowns with 0 interceptions. His final stat line, 24 completions on 31 attempts, nearly 300 yards, wasn't just good, it was historic. It was the kind of performance that validated every chant, every frustrated headline, and every argument that he should have been under center all along. The locker room afterward told the story. Players mobbed him. Coaches finally exhaled. Haslam hugged him in front of cameras. And Kevin Stefanski? He stood off to the side, silent, knowing the shift was complete. Cleveland didn't just find its quarterback, they found its heartbeat. Shedeur Sanders' rise wasn't just a win for the Browns. It was a warning shot across the entire NFL. For decades, teams clung to a traditional hierarchy. Coaches call the shots, owners sign the checks. Players follow orders. But what unfolded in Cleveland flipped that script. A rookie with a famous last name and undeniable talent wasn't elevated because his coach believed in him. It happened because fans demanded it. Ownership stepped in, and teammates threw their support behind him. Sanders became the first Cleveland quarterback in decades not chosen purely by a coach's plan, but by a collision of business, politics, and performance pressure. That's what makes his debut so significant. Yes, he threw touchdowns and ignited the offense, but what really shook the league was how quickly his presence forced change at every level of the organization. Stefanski lost play-calling duties. Coordinator Alex Van Pelt gained power. Ownership proved willing to override the sideline. And Sanders himself became both the face of the team and the flashpoint of a larger cultural shift. League insiders noticed. Other GMs whispered about Cleveland's decision as player empowerment in real time. Analysts framed it as the latest step in the NFL's slow but steady evolution. Star athletes are no longer just players. They're brands, revenue streams, and in many cases, bigger than their coaches. It also exposed the tension between team guys and personality guys. Stefanski seemed convinced Sanders' visibility and charisma were distractions. But to fans, and increasingly to the business side of franchises, that charisma is exactly what fuels excitement, ticket sales, and national relevance. In other words, Sanders' success didn't just put Cleveland back on the map. It forced the entire league to grapple with an uncomfortable truth. The modern quarterback isn't just a field general. He's the franchise itself. What started as a Week 1 controversy has transformed into something much bigger. The rebirth of a franchise and maybe even a redefinition of what it means to be a quarterback in the modern NFL. Think back just a few weeks. Shedeur Sanders was standing on the sideline, helmet in hand, as fans screamed his name and his coach ignored them. He was the spark that wasn't allowed to light. The chants, the social media firestorm, the open frustration from teammates. Those were the cracks in the Browns' foundation. But instead of crumbling completely, Cleveland chose to flip the script. Ownership stepped in. Coaches were stripped of power, and suddenly Sanders was under center. Not because the process played out cleanly, but because the dysfunction became impossible to hide. That's the irony. What looked like chaos might go down as the most important turning point in Cleveland's modern history. In his first games, Sanders hasn't just looked competent, he's looked like the answer. Touchdowns, calm leadership, undeniable charisma. The team rallies behind him, the city rallies around him, and the league is being forced to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, the Browns finally stumbled into their franchise quarterback. But it's not just about stats. It's about identity. For the first time in decades, Cleveland doesn't feel like the punchline of the AFC North. It feels like a threat. And at the center of it all is a rookie who refuses to be rattled, no matter what noise swirls around him. The Stefanski saga will become a cautionary tale of pride and resistance. Sanders' rise will be told as a story of patience, resilience, and timing. And the Browns fans who kept chanting his name long after bitter losses, they'll forever be remembered as the ones who sparked a revolution. Because in Cleveland, one truth now stands tall. Shedeur Sanders isn't just the quarterback of the future. He's the quarterback of right now.